Welcome back to Budget in Focus. We're discussing Budget 2025, the People's Progressive Party's farewell budget, Ashni Singh's exit act. We're going to be having a conversation with Mr. Vincent Henry, Member of Parliament. Mr. Henry has just made his presentation on the Budget 2025. He is focused on indigenous and hinterland issues in his presentation. Vincent, welcome to this conversation, Focus on Budget 2025, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Now, there's a lot of boast about how much money has been put into the hands of the indigenous villages and communities across the country. There's been the clear omission in the PPP's message regarding how this money became available. There was no consultation with the indigenous communities, no free, prior, and informed consent from the indigenous peoples of this country regarding the sale of carbon credits. There was no consultation with the indigenous peoples of this country regarding what share of the carbon credit revenues they will get. The sale was an imposition. The percentage, 15% to indigenous communities, was an imposition. And there was also the imposition of finance committees stacked with PPP operatives to manage the money in these villages. You touched on it a bit, but could you share with us your insight with respect to the impact of those dollars that went into the communities of the indigenous communities across the country? Is there anything to measure the result from the investments that you know of?
Okay, well, let me start from a little back, way back. The LCDS has been on the table for some time. And indeed, it's reached a stage where carbon credits were available, monies came in, an amount of money is there until I think it's next 10 years or so from now, a little under. And but the worrying part of it all, like you mentioned, is that at no time were the indigenous people given the opportunity to really to have a say in the salient points or matters involved in the carbon credit. For example, X amount of dollars coming in. How should we allocate this money? That was never asked of the indigenous people. You had impositions. You had the man in the engine room announcing the amount that will be given to the indigenous people. And when I remember hearing at the NTC conference, when one young Tushao stood up and asked, when are you going to give us a chance to really discuss how we reach 15%, and if that's enough, or what could it be? He was told that if you have problems with how it's allocated,
you can leave
you
it.
can leave it.
Yeah.
You can leave it. The Tushao, of course, cannot leave it because his village is expecting to get a portion of the money. And but the mere fact that you, in a dictatorial way, will tell the indigenous people, he represents indigenous people, a young indigenous leader, that you asked him too many questions, you could leave it. That is very insulting, that's very arrogant. That is not the way how it is supposed to be. When you're dealing with indigenous peoples, we have to consult, we have to talk it over. In our villages, when there's a main decision to be made, the council sits, they examine the issues, and then they go to the general meeting, the village general meeting, and again it's discussed. That is how we are. The act captured that, and that is what should have happened in terms of the carbon credits and the monies came in. But I will tell you, in terms of what was received, there was one community that insisted that they want the money to be distributed to the families in the community. At first, the Ministry of American Affairs refused to allow that to happen, but the people insisted. They insisted, and the Tushao left the village and came down to Georgetown to receive the money. To receive the money. When he arrived at the Ministry of American Affairs, who the ministry is now saying they don't deal with the monetary part of it. When he arrived there, he was told that we cannot give you that money to share among your villagers. We want to give you a minibus. You'll get a minibus. And so they arranged for the poor Tushao to buy the minibus and take it back to the village. When he arrived there, the people told him, they called a meeting urgently and told him, you were not supposed to go and bring a minibus. You were to go and bring funds that we could allocate to the community, to the family members here. And they sent him back with the bus.
But here's where the problem comes. The American Act provides for governance of villages.
Yes.
It provides for an elected leadership team called a village council headed by a chairman who's a Tushao.
Tushao.
The village council is responsible for managing the assets of the village in the best interest of the people.
Yes.
It's the custodian of the title and all other assets of the village.
Yeah.
So it is that village council which must manage the money.
Yes.
They set up subcommittees. There's a finance committee that manages the money. But Jagdeo instructed that separate finance committees must be established for managing this LCDS money. And they identified their own people from the People's Progressive Party membership in the villages to form that committee. So they can't control and they can't do them anything because they're operating outside of the American Act, parallel to the village council, totally disregarding the presence of the village council or the authority vested in the council by law. So this is where the mismanagement clearly occurred. And in the case you just cited, it is evident that the village made a decision. And the law says that when the general village membership makes a decision based on a 2/3 majority, that goes. So where does the ministry get off changing the decision of the villages? The disrespect is painful. I can tell you that, and I know you didn't want to name the community, but I can tell you about Sacred Heart. Sacred Heart is a community in the Aruka River in Region 1.
Mm-hmm.
They got the LCDS money and they decided that they were going to distribute it. So they agreed that they were going to do a housing improvement project.
Right. Very good.
And so that the money will come to the homes and to the families, and they will use it to improve the quality of their homes.
Very good.
It just turned out that the people that the People's Progressive Party put in charge of the money decided that if you don't vote in PPP, you don't get no money. And so some households got $400,000 a piece, some got $300,000 a piece, and some got none.
That's really horrible. That's ridiculous.
Right.
And you see, that's the point. That's the whole story. What we are proposing, or what we will do when we get into government, is that we will have a two-tiered way of doing it. One, first of all, we'll increase the amount of monies that the communities can get. Right? When we had checked in the village on the average amount each community, each household got, they got like $180,000, which is not much in terms of real development if you want to do a big business or whatever. But what we are saying is that we will increase the amount and to an amount that will be able to not only give the community members through their families, but you'll also be able to have some that they can the village council, right, to be able to use for the developmental plans and whatnot. Whether it be buying a vehicle, whether it be buying a boat, repairing an old 18, they will decide how they want to use it. But the other one per family member, family, they'll be able to use it like what you said just now on their house. They'll be able to, cut a new farm. They'll be able to buy equipment to make farine. And once that is done for several years, remember we have several years to come, you will see an increase, a gradual increase of the situation in the community, the situation in the household. They can even spend their education. They could send their children to earn a skill or something. So eventually, the standard of living would rise, and so
But
we allow the people to.
there are two troubling issues here, Vincent. I've spoken to a number of leaders, and here, here are the two issues. One, there is no mechanism to measure the value from the spent dollars. Now, if you look at Kako, for example, big flurry, major excitement,
Uh-huh.
PPP inspired project. They're going to do a mall.
Wow.
So they did what? 10, maybe 13 stalls. And they set them up there. But only one is functional. And that one opens 2 or 3 days a week and sells basic grocery items. The others are not functional.
Mhm.
So the question, therefore, is where's the value? The money has gone down in structures.
Uh-huh.
I'm not saying that persons pilfered money or anything like that. I'm saying that the village was inspired by external forces to pursue this project. And clearly the project pursued. The construction of the facilities was a success. But the purpose for which they were constructed, a complete failure. So that money could have been used wiser and to better effect had local knowledge informed the project itself.
Exactly. Exactly. And this high-handedness that like we mentioned before, you're asking too many questions.
Well,
Go.
but that's the point. The second concern raised is that our property, this is what leaders are saying, our property was mortgaged without our consent. Our
Yes,
property, meaning
yes.
the standing forest,
Right, right.
mortgaged without our consent, even
Right.
without our knowledge,
Right.
right? And what are we to do? We are powerless. This is ours. It's given to us. We have a title for it. We have no say in how it is used. So the level of disrespect for the indigenous peoples of this country is unimaginable. I mean, yes, the APNU has major plans for the indigenous peoples. We will significantly lift the income or the emoluments of Tushaus, deputy Tushaus, and village councillors. That's on the cards. You will recall that even without oil money, the APNU AFC administration significantly raised
Right.
the emoluments of Tushaus and deputy Tushaus.
Yeah.
But that aside, Vincent, Minister Sukai, in defending the mismanagement of this money, said that Tushaus are keeping the money because they signed for it.
I'm not
How-
sure about that. I don't. You
What kind?
see, you see, the one of the things that we have got to ensure, right, is that we educate our village council of their rights, so that whenever such like inflows of funds, etc., come, they must know their role in the management of it, and not just sit down aside and say, "Ooh, money come, let it deal with it," because whatever, if anything goes wrong, it's all of us as a team will feel, the consequences of it. Monies, coming for development, and the monies are just lying some corner, etc. And well, in that I heard a case of what happened in the Pomeroons, right, where Tushao came to the ministry, and he was actually coerced into buying a backhoe or something like that, a big equipment, instead of, and they had 17 million for the budget, and they were told that he had to pay 15.5. And it took a long time before anything could have come out of it. Eventually, they got a small backhoe for it.
Yeah, but you see, this is the problem. This is
Too much of ministry
interference
involvement.
interference into
Too
the
much.
life and governance of villages where interference is not necessary. Right where next door to where you live in St. Ignatius Village, the Tushao went on his own, paid allegedly for some compactor truck to dispose of garbage. Several months have passed and the village does not know where this truck is. It has never arrived. It is allegedly paid for, but it has never arrived. All these things are happening because of interference, mismanagement, and the indigenous communities and their leaders are being accused of doing wrong with this money, whereas the reality is they're being used as a cover. For example, my understanding is that some of the money that was voted in the last budget was put into the Amrinian Development Fund and then transferred into the Amrinian Purpose Fund, which is an account set up for revenue inflows from royalties and so on for villages to be disbursed to the villages later. Why would you cut out a chunk of money from developmental fund and put it in a fund that is not designed for that purpose? We don't know what is happening with the money. You know, for example, that when we got into office, the AP and UFC got into office in 2015, we discovered that a check for $1 billion was written to the Ministry of Marine Affairs. I think it originated from the Geology and Mines
Yeah,
Commission.
GGMC, right? 1.2.
And it was deposited into the Amrinian Purpose Fund. That account, no, we never found the successive permanent secretaries were unable to reconcile that account, were unable to find evidence of the spending of that money. And we seem to be heading in the same way in terms of absence of accountability. Vincent, what is happening in the Ministry of Marine Affairs?
Well, actually, I raised that issue several budgets ago. In 2014, the Auditor General report, it said indeed that the monies were transferred from the GGMC, and that money was supposed to be like the Amerindian Act, states that some amount of royalties, etc., would be paid into the
Yeah, they
into the
transferred it as
transfer.
advance on royalties to be earned in the
Yeah, and I
future.
was told that the future is up to this year, 2025. So, like 8 years ago to 2025, they collected money in advance, and
Yeah.
and then it disappeared because the Auditor General couldn't really trace what happened to it. They
And then
weren't
they blame
received.
Sidney Alicock for not being able to account for money that they
So that
spent.
is how they blame. Well, they
Anyway,
they abused it. They abused the
we
fund. And I will tell you something. I saw at the back of the hostel here a large number of tractors, you know, in the compound, and you had like vines growing over them and all sorts of stuff. You know, if I had a chance today, my time ran out. I would have asked specific question. But next week is the examination of the estimates, and we'll have a chance to ask them what are those tractors doing there, and some minibuses also. And you have bush going over them. Maybe by now they cut out the bush.
uh, uh, thank you, Vincent, for joining me on Budget in Focus. But there's one thing I'd like to say before we close this segment, and that is this: there is massive interference in villages, but I'll only address one at this time. 4 miles in Kaituma. Matakai, Region 1. Following the election of a new Tushao, that Tushao didn't find favor with the PPP strong people in the village, and so they decided that they're going to undermine her because she's a woman, because she's not of the PPP, because she stands for right and fairness, and she stands for justice and equity. They fraudulently produced a document called a petition calling for her removal. They went around the village, solicited in excess of 200 signatures, purportedly for the purposes of getting cash grants. People happily wrote their names,
Oh
signed,
gosh.
and provided their contact numbers,
Uh-huh.
only to be summoned to a meeting subsequently at which a petition was read for the removal of the Tushao by the deputy Tushao, no less, decked in his red and black. And he announced that he had in excess of 200 signatures, whereupon the village recognized that they were duped, and they rebelled and chased him out of the stage.
Wow.
Notwithstanding the position taken by the villagers, the minister instructed that an investigation be done pursuant to the petition to remove the Tushao. And they, the minister and her team, issued instructions for the money and property, including gold, collected in form of royalty from miners in the village, be lodged at the police station in Port Kaituma. This again is massive interference. You have more than $10 million worth of gold locked up at the police station, and the village requires revenues to administer the business of the people of the village, and they can't touch it because Pauline Sukai says so. And the time by which she ought to have ruled on the petition has long expired, and she has not said anything to the village. Guyanese need to become aware of what is happening. Indigenous leaders across the country must be aware that what's happening in their village is not the beginning and the end of anything. There's widespread mismanagement, undue interference, and downright mismanagement at the level of the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, and interference into the life, livelihood, and governance of indigenous villages across the country, particularly where there is a deposit of mineral. That's it for this edition of Budget in Focus 2025. We'll be back with more when Elson Lowe speaks with another presenter after this.